Welcome, and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode until the question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question over the phone, please dial *1. I would like to inform all parties that today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Thank you. You may begin when ready.
Good afternoon. I am Antonia Jaramillo with NASA's Office of Communications. NASA is planning to roll the Space Launch System rocket and Orion spacecraft back to the Vehicle Assembly Building. While in the Vehicle Assembly Building, teams will replace a faulty upper stage check valve and a small leak on the tail service mast umbilical on the mobile launcher, while an off-site supplier of gaseous nitrogen used for the Artemis 1 wet dress rehearsal makes upgrades to their systems. The rocket remains in a safe configuration as teams assess next steps. Here to provide opening remarks and provide an update on the path forward are Tom Whitmire, Deputy Associate Administrator for Common Exploration Systems Development at NASA Headquarters, Charlie Blackwell Thompson, Exploration Ground Systems Artemis Launch Director at NASA's Kennedy Space Center, and Mike Serafin, Artemis 1 Mission Manager at NASA Headquarters. First, we will hear from Tom Whitmire. Tom?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm here in Florida with Charlie. It's a beautiful day in Florida. First of all, let me say, last Thursday we had gone and did another wet dress rehearsal. And Charlie, I want to compliment you and your team. It's always fantastically interesting to have an opportunity to watch along. It's a very delicate dance in order to bring a rocket alive, fuel it up, look at all the pressures, temperatures, all the valves, the commands we send to the vehicle, the response we see back from the vehicle. It's a really complicated thing to do. We're putting the pieces of the puzzles together. I think we figured out a few more pieces on Thursday, but we've got a few more pieces in front of us. So I really did want to just start off by complimenting the team. I think they do a fantastic job. For those who are familiar with this type of work, any new launch system, when it first goes through this process, this is the type of thing you learn. You learn how the vehicle is going to react to the commands you send to the vehicle. You learn how your systems are sending those commands to the vehicle. And I could just tell you, for the folks that don't get a chance to see this, the professionalism and capability of the team that we have doing this work is outstanding. And so I was very impressed with that. For folks that have been following along with the effort, we did run into, on this third attempt, some issues with nitrogen supply early on in the attempt. We also saw that a little bit on the second attempt. And so talking to Charlie and her team, the decision was to, we knew we had some more work we needed to do. We had to replace the we had to check out the upper stage check valve and see what we had there. We knew we had a small leak on the umbilical. And so the combined decision was to go ahead and bring the vehicle back in the VAB so we can start that work. This also allows an opportunity with a nitrogen supplier to upgrade the facility and provide what would be a more robust capability, which is what we would need for our activities. Nitrogen is used for umbilical purges. It's used in other parts of the vehicle operations. It's very important for the work we do. This is a very capable vehicle. When you have a moon-capable vehicle, it proportionally uses a little bit more nitrogen to be able to perform the tasks that we have. And so for us having a robust, while it would have been, I think Charlie would have maybe wanted to stay out just a little bit longer and take another look at the last piece of the puzzle that we're looking at for tanking operations. I think the decision was to go ahead and bring it back, and then we're going to also give the folks that are providing us the nitrogen a chance to really update their system and make sure we have all the necessary upgrades we have for future attempts. Charlie's also going to work with Cliff, and they're going to make some recommendations on what our path forward looks like. I'm going to let Charlie talk about that. We have a couple options at this point. But I can tell you, and we've talked about this just a few minutes ago, we will absolutely go back out. We're absolutely going to do a wet dress rehearsal. We'll demonstrate cryo-loading of the spheres, and we also demonstrate terminal countdown. So it's just a matter of what's the right time and what's the right way to do that and how that might fit in our forward scheduling. So I'll let Charlie talk a little bit about that. The rocket itself still does, the Mega Moon rocket's still doing very well. We have the one check valve is literally the only real issue we've seen so far, so we're very proud of the rocket. We think it's a great rocket. We do know that we fully expected, we saw this at Green Run too, by the way, that we would learn a lot about how to fuel the vehicle. Particularly, it's unique to the site you're at, the systems you have, the complexity of what we're trying to do here at KSC. So that's not really I think it's a surprise to us. I think it's just something that we knew we needed to get really smart with this rocket, and I think we're really getting smart with this rocket. But we got a little bit more work in front of us, and I'm looking forward to hearing Charlie's thoughts and ideas as we move forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Charlie.
All right, thank you, Tom, and hello, everyone. I first want to echo everything that Tom has said. I mean, our team has been working really hard, and I think that they're doing a great job working through all of these first-time operations. And I am constantly impressed and proud of the problem-solving skills that I see demonstrated within the team. Since we last spoke, you know, I always talk about how we take data, and when you get data, you assess it, you figure out what it means to you, and then you add that into formulating your plan forward. So since we last spoke, we've gotten a couple of new pieces of data. The first is that we got some information on the capabilities of the GN2 supplier and some additional capability that they wanted to bring online, the time frame for that. We've also had the opportunity to gain access to the TSMU at the pad and do some initial assessment. We certainly had additional troubleshooting planned at the pad, and we can do that work at the pad or in the VAB. But given that, you know, just looking at the overall situation, making the decision to roll back, we decided that we would do the first part of the assessment at the pad, and I can report on those results in just a second here. And then we would save the second part of the TSMU troubleshooting for when we get back to the VAB. So let's see, what have we done with respect to that TSMU? We were able to get the access stands from the VAB. We were able to get them out to the pad and gain access to the area that we wanted to take a look at. We completed a hands-on assessment of the drain assist purge line, which did not reveal anything obvious. The team also performed a couple of ambient leak checks where they provided some pressure across those lines, and they used some of the mass specs and some of our available instrumentation to see if we could detect a leak there at baseline or above baseline at ambient conditions, and we were not able to detect any leakage. So we've done 2 different tests there. The troubleshooting plan going forward, again, it's the same plan that we would have performed at the pad, but given that we're returning to the VAB, we're going to hold off until we get there, and that'll be to remove that purge can. We will do another set of leak checks with some probes and some instrumentation to see if we can find evidence of a leak. We'll also do inspections of the floor green seals that are there on the flange. There are some soft goods that we can replace on that temperature transducer that Greg talked about the last time we were here. And then we'll do some torque checks and some retorque on all of the flange connections. And so we have a set of troubleshooting steps that we'll go through, again, once we get back to the VAB. Let's see. As Tom mentioned, since we're rolling back, we will take care of that upper stage check valve, and we'll continue to work the leak, as I said. And then we will also look at whether or not there's any additional work that we decide to go pick up in the VAB. We do have some different schedule options that we're looking at there, and I'll talk about that in just a second. We have also, so currently, what are we doing out at the pad? Well, we are deconfiguring from wet dress. Our extensible columns have been reconfigured. The side flame deflector has been put in the park position. Our engine service platform has been repositioned. CAA has been extended, and so all of those things that get you into that wet dress configuration, we're in the process of repositioning those. Tonight we have core stage power coming up, and we'll be taking some of our COPVs to standby pressure, and then we'll be working our preparations to deservice the boosters. And that work will take us out through the balance of the week, and we'll here towards the end of the week, into the weekend, we'll begin picking up our preps for roll, and that should have us ready to roll back somewhere around Tuesday time frame. We'll set a time for the roll as we get closer and we get through some of this work based on the weather and some other things, just seeing how the schedule lays out. But currently Tuesday is the time frame. Once we get back, we are currently working on a couple of different schedule options that we'll be reviewing with the management team over the course of the week. We'll look at what I call a VAB quick turn option, which is we come back to the VAB, we take care of a minimal amount of things, the upper stage check valve, the TSMU leak, maybe one or two other items that are determined to be highly desirable or required before the next wet dress attempt, and then we would look to roll back out and get that wet dress attempt behind us. There's a second option that looks at doing a greater amount of work in the VAB, maybe getting closer to your rollout for flight configuration, and then you would roll out, do your wet dress, come back, take care of your FTS testing, and then roll out for launch. And then a third option that looks at whether or not you could do a wet dress and launch in one rollout campaign. So there's still work to do on all three of those. I think it would be premature to speculate on which of those would be the leading candidate. We'll go work through them. We'll look at them relative to the work and relative to, retiring our schedule or technical risk, which of those, helps in the different areas, and we'll bring that story forward over the next few days. And I think that's all I have for opening remarks.
Mike, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Good afternoon, and again, thanks for continuing to follow the Artemis program as we get ready for the Artemis 1 mission. I'll be brief in my comments. I'll rewind here briefly. If you remember, shortly before we rolled out and initially started talking about the wet dress rehearsal, we did highlight that there were some challenges ahead of us getting through this last and final test in the test campaign, the ground test campaign, and some uncertainty associated with how long it would take before we would be ready to talk next steps. And if you go back to that February 24th call, you'll realize that we were being cautious for a couple of reasons, and we have had some lessons learned. We have had to take extra time, and we have had to repeat the wet dress rehearsal for a number of reasons. And the team has been very thoughtful in how we proceed to the next step. We have had a number of challenges to overcome, and those challenges require perseverance. And that perseverance, in turn, is building character within the team and character necessary to have optimism in when we are going to be ready to fly. But we are not ready to put a pin on the calendar yet. That said, I'm very impressed with the team, their toughness and professionalism working through these issues, their ability to communicate in fairly short order what the issues are, and then to rally around the problem, and then also in parallel with that, apply lessons learned. We do have a healthy lessons learned culture in place here, and regardless of how much time it takes to work through the technical issues that Charlie outlined, we are going to use that extra time to roll in the lessons learned so that we can be better prepared for day of launch. So those are the only comments that I had. I'll turn it back to you, Tony.
Thank you. We will now begin the question and answer portion. Please remember to stick to one question and identify to whom it is directed. If we have time, we'll allow reporters to ask a second question. You can enter *1 on your phone to be entered into the queue at any time, and you can enter *2 if you'd like to be removed from the queue. Your phones are on mute now, and the operator will open your mic when we're ready and close your mic after you ask your question. Shortly after we conclude, you can listen to a replay of this teleconference online. We'll begin with Marcia Dunn from the Associated Press.
Hi, probably for Charlie. Regarding your three options in the VAB, what's the least amount of time you could spend in the VAB, and what's the longest amount of time would you anticipate with with the options? And is the June 6th through 16th launch window pretty much done now, regardless of which option you choose? Thanks.
Hey, Marcia, great question, and I wish I had an exact answer for you. I will have that later this week, but we're still really working through that in terms of the minimum amount of time. I wouldn't really want to speculate on it just yet. I mean, if we were in just looking at the initial assessments for the check valve work and for the TSMU plate work, I mean, it's not a significant amount of work. And so I would say that, somewhere in the weeks kind of time frame, but I'll be able to give you a much better answer later in the week when we've done the scheduled assessments. This is all still pretty fresh, this decision, and so we are working those schedules even as we speak, but I don't have the shortest and the longest yet, but I'll be able to give you an answer a little bit later in the week.
Yeah, Marshall, this is Tom. Let me answer the second question. Yeah, I think we really owe it to Charlie and the team an opportunity to go back and take a look at the schedules and see where we're at. Certainly, I think the earlier June window is challenged at this point. Mike can provide information about later windows if you want, but we're really taking this a step at a time. I know we've said this throughout the process that we really want to focus in on learning what we need to learn about how we best command and work with this vehicle. The vehicle itself is performing very well, but the operations are really complicated, and we want to make sure that we get them right. So that's why I think the agency feels more comfortable in providing you information once we get through a wet dress and actually have a successful tanking operations. I'm pretty encouraged by the things that Charlie and the team have already learned so far. They're actually very interesting aspects of the interaction between the ML and the rocket that were a little different than what we were anticipating, and I think the team has done a tremendous job of kind of accounting for that. We're really actually very interested going back out there and seeing how this all works out. I actually think that would be pretty cool. I think the early June window would be challenging, and Mike, if you want, go ahead and provide information about the following window.
Yeah, Tom, as you mentioned, there's definitely a challenge for the June 6th to 16th window. Just because of the Earth, Moon dynamics and our need to head outbound and come back within specific constraints, the next launch period opportunity is from June the 29th through July the 12th, and then there's another opportunity after that. We're on for about 2 weeks, roughly off for about 2 weeks. So the next opportunity after that is in late July, so July 26th through August the 9th.
Thank you. Next up, we have Steve Gorman with Reuters.
Yeah, actually, you just kind of answered my question, but let me just double check. I believe that Charlie said that you anticipate at this point that the rollback of the rocket and crew capsule would probably begin on next Tuesday, a week from tomorrow.
Correct. Yes, next Tuesday.
Thanks.
Thank you. Next up, we have Bill Harwood with CBS News.
Yeah, hey guys. I actually have a non-technical question today. And this is a question I get asked a lot. Can someone tell me where the phrase mega moon rocket came from? I mean, is that an official name? I'm wondering if that reflects agency policy. Is it from the administrator? I'm only asking this because it's not the sort of phrase we're used to hearing, and it now seems to kind of be a standard part of these briefings. Thanks.
Yeah, I thought it came from you, Bill. we had heard that people were calling it the mega moon rocket, so we just kind of adopted that as a phrase. I don't think it's an official thing, so hopefully we haven't gotten in trouble by using it. But no, I like it because it's a good way to talk about the rocket, right? It is a really big rocket, and so I think actually I don't know. I can't answer your question. I think it might have been something one of the press folks started saying, and we picked up on it. So I thought it was pretty cool, so we thought we'd just go and run with it. But when you talk about the things like we're talking about today, where these complex operations involving cryoloading and basically sequencing back and forth how we do it, and it's a very, really, really fantastically interesting process that they've come up with now to really kind of account for some of the thermodynamics. So I think that's the kind of challenge you only see with something like a mega moon rocket. I don't think you kind of see those type of challenges with a rocket that's not that size. And so we really think it's a good way to talk about it because the kind of complicated things Charlie and her team or the pieces of the puzzle they're putting together really fit with mega moon rockets. So I probably didn't answer your question, but I think we kind of picked up on it from and Tony's saying yes, so I think that's where it came from. It came from you guys.
Yes, we have referred to it like that and agreed, Tom. I like mega moon rocket too. Next up, we have Eric Berger from Ars Technica.
Hi, thanks very much for doing this. I really appreciate all the updates we're getting on this. I guess this is probably for Tom, and I'm just, stepping back a little bit. It's been, 41 years since you went through this with the space shuttle. And I have to believe that, very little of the workforce that was involved in sort of getting the shuttle all up and ready for its first flight is left. So, how much of this is really, you've talked about the rocket, you've talked about the ground systems, but how much of this is a learning experience for the people at NASA, sort of going through the final development and launch of a rocket like this? Because it seems like, as I say, it seems like there's probably not a whole lot of institutional knowledge left from the last one y'all did.
Yeah, I started in '84. I'm going to ask Charlie when she started, but so I was there right before Challenger, actually. So I was there for a while. I think, Eric, I think that's a fair question. I think a little bit, thermodynamics are highly complicated. It's very difficult to model these complex systems, particularly when you have environmental considerations. Actually, the heat of the day that we're actually attempting some of these operations affects the timing and sequence. So we knew from the shuttle program we had an MPTA test down at Stennis that they did, and then we had a number of loading attempts here at the Cape. And we did go back and research that, and I think Charlie probably has some folks that work for her that I'm going to let her talk about that actually were around for those days. I didn't really get started for myself, I didn't get started till '84. But so I think that's a fair question. So my answer would be we do rely on these folks. It tends to be the crowd community is a very tight-knit community, and we actually have very good expertise in that area. But there's certainly a lot of learning. It's just an incredibly complicated thing, to avoid geysering with the downcomers and to be able to have the cold enough LOX going into the LOX tank, and then to have the hydrogen and not have any kind of pressure spikes go through the system as you load the hydrogen. And the mega moon rocket like this is actually very, very complicated. So Charlie, because I know you know all these folks.
Yeah, so let me speak to that. So I actually am really blessed to have two folks that were around for STS-1, and so they do bring that experience to our team, and they do bring that perspective to the team, and we're really, really grateful to have their experience, because like Tom said, I started here after the Challenger accident, so certainly wasn't around for STS-1, but I had the opportunity to talk to one of the cryoprop guys just this past week about, the similarities between the two. And I believe the number is somewhere in and around 5 tankings that we had at Kennedy prior to the first launch. But there was also 12 static firings that required 19 tankings, I believe, as part of the MPTA testing it back at Stennis. And so when you really look at STS-1 through that lens, and you look at where we are, we're very much in family with that experience.
Yeah. Hey, Tom and Charlie, this is Mike Seraphin. I guess the only thing I would add is while the physics are the same, and yes, obviously the people have moved on, and in most cases, how we assess and monitor and calculate a lot of these things has changed over the course of time. So, we back in the early shuttle era and Apollo era, everything was analog, and now we've digitized many things, and the ways that you calculate and determine these values and the computing power and the software algorithms and all that is different. So you got to have the techniques and the mindset to handle these tests, even though the physics are the same, using modern day technology. So I think while people have moved on, technology has also moved on. So there's learning required on both facets.
Thank you. Next up, we have Jeff Faust with Space News.
Good afternoon. I was wanting some more details about exactly what this gaseous nitrogen issue is that you had in the last couple of wet dress rehearsals, and what the supplier is doing to correct the problem. And does it affect only 39B, or is this a site-wide issue that might affect launches at 39A or other pads? Thanks.
Okay, yeah, we have an off-site supplier for nitrogen. You probably have seen them if you drive on site here. You come up State Road 3 there on your left-hand side as you get ready to come into the gate here at the Kennedy Space Center. They provide a main pipe to the Kennedy Space Center, which is used for multiple other activities besides our own. We're a little bit unique because we have a volumetric requirement for our vehicle that's higher than the vehicles that are our size. And so we will continue to have that capability available for, like Crew 4 is going to have the capability in place while they do in parallel with that some work to upgrade their capabilities Charlie will get into a little bit more details on it, but basically, fundamentally, it's just giving them a more robust capability to provide a high volume of gaseous nitrogen. Gaseous nitrogen was also a limiting quantity when we were downstairs. So those of you who were there for the green run will remember we actually ran our clock based on when we were going to run out of gaseous nitrogen. It's really important for the vehicle, and when we're doing the type of testing that we're talking about here, where we're actually changing up the loading operations and stuff, you're really under a purge, so probably a little bit more than you would normally see. And it's very important also because we use the purge to help empty the tanks after we're done. So, we really feel it's an important commodity for us. We use it a lot for the activities we're involved in. Charlie talked a little bit about what's going on at the plant, but that's generally the idea is we're looking to get an upgrade in place so we can have a really robust, capable supply for our next activity.
Yeah, and let's see, I think the only really piece that I would add, I think Tom did a really good job explaining it, is that there are two systems that are available at the plant. One is an air separation system that runs and provides daily flows, and then that's not your launch kind of flows, but that's sort of your daily use on the pipeline. And then there is a launch support system that is a series of vaporizers and pumps that provides that increased capability for when you're in launch and you're in some of your higher demand flows. And there has been a plan to upgrade and bring on some new equipment which adds some ambient air vaporizers. Those are already at the plant. They're already installed. It's just a matter of tying them in. It gives them a better capability. And so that's part of the work that will be done over the next couple weeks.
Thank you. Next up, we have Ramin Skiba with Wired Magazine.
Hi, thank you for doing this. I wanted to ask, what changed on the weekend that you decided to roll back, after Friday's press conference? And also on Friday, you were sounding, optimistic and confident, and are you still feeling that way?
Well, we're always optimistic and confident. No, we're actually pretty excited. Charlie wanted to stay out a little bit longer and test out what we think is the right solution for hydrogen cryo-loading. I think they've come up with a plan that we're going to try at our wet dress next time out. It's really that we went back and we looked at where we were with the gaseous nitrogen, and we decided that all in all, when you balanced everything out, that we needed to get this upgrade in to have the kind of robust capability. We had seen outages at the start of both for our wet dress 2 and 3, and that actually put us back on our timeline a little bit, which we don't like going back on our timeline because we want to give the team the most time they can have to actually go through the operation. So we thought, and we knew we needed to get the check valve taken care of. We knew we had this upper leak we wanted to check in. So we balanced all that. We talked to Charlie and her team. And it was really kind of a combined of all those things. So we said, hey, we're probably better off going back. We'll update the procedures. We'll get the check belt fixed so we can get into more of kind of a standard operations. And it'll give the folks who are doing the nitrogen a chance to really upgrade their facility. And we thought that would put us in the best possible position. These are really challenging tasks, this thermodynamic thing that we're working on. And we really wanted to, I think we thought it out. We thought, we really want to give these folks the best opportunity to get through this and try out what we think is, could be a successful loading operation. Charlie, you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, I would say, when you get new data, you always come back and you reassess and you see if that makes you change your answer. And so when we were here on Friday, I was trying to think about which day it was. We were here on Friday. We were fresh out of wet dress run number 3. We had a troubleshooting plan immediately in front of us, so we were ready to go execute on Friday that evening, as a matter of fact, and get us back into a wet dress configuration probably by late this week. I think the delta or the data that we got after that was, we had this issue with the GN2 at the beginning of tanking, and then maybe a little less known, we also had an issue during the drain operations, a very similar failure. And so we had 2 plant issues during the same operation. So we had asked the team to go back and take a look at that to help us understand, our confidence going into wet dress run number 4. And so when we got the data back after they had had a chance to troubleshoot it and really look at the system, their recommendation was that we tie in this additional equipment, makes the plant far more robust, really puts us in a much better configuration. And so when we had that piece of data combined with the work that, we had to go do, we went back and reassessed. As Tom said, it's easier to troubleshoot in some ways a hydrogen leak at the pad where you can test it and you're in a configuration to do so. But understanding that from a GN2 supply perspective, we probably weren't going to be there this week, then
standing by. Due to technical difficulty, the call will resume in approximately 5 minutes. You will hear music until that time. Again, today's conference will begin in approximately 5 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back, and thank you for standing by. You may now resume the call. Thank you.
Hey everyone, this is Antonia Jaramillo with NASA's Office of Communication. We apologize for the interruption. Our line got disconnected, but thank you for standing by. The last question that was asked was to Charlie about why we decided to roll back to the vehicle assembly building following Friday's teleconference. So Charlie, I'll just let you go ahead and answer that question again.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure when we dropped during that response, but essentially, like we approach all issues, you know, we take data, we reassess, we fold that into the plan, we see if it changes our answer or our path forward, and if it does, then we certainly, you know, change as a result of new data that we're given. So just like, you know, any other issue or any other op, we go back and we look at any lessons learned or issues that we had during the op to see what we might need to do different. When we met here on Friday, we primarily focused on the TSMU issue. We developed a plan to go address that at the pad or to go do that evaluation at the pad, and the teams began to put that into work. In parallel with that, we also began looking at some of the other NCs that were opened as part of that, and one of them was the issue with the gaseous nitrogen. We had experienced an issue at the beginning of or prior to our load, and then another one during our drain operation. So we had asked the team to go off and look at that to see what we might be able to do to mitigate that going forward, ensuring that it wouldn't be a problem for us should we decide to tank the vehicle this week. Which, when we talked on Friday, that was our general direction and our plan. After they went and looked at it, they recommended that they tie in this additional equipment, making their system far more robust, and felt like that was really what was needed to be ready for an Artemis wet dress rehearsal. And so then when we looked at the timelines associated with that and we took that new data, it did cause us to look at what we could get done at the pad, and did it make sense for us to stay at the pad while this capability was restored, or whether it made sense to come back to the VAB, go ahead and change out that check valve on the upper stage so that the next time we tank, we could get a full tanking, and that was the decision that we made over the weekend.
Great, thank you, Charlie. Next up, we have Andrea Leinfelder with the Houston Chronicle.
Hi. This first question is for Mike. Can you help me explain the launch windows? Is it when the Earth and Moon are aligned for the most direct path? And Charlie, when you said 5 tankings, were all of those loading propellant or wet dress rehearsals, or did those 5 tankings include the STS-1 launch cell for any scrubs while preparing for that first launch? Thanks.
Charlie, do you want to take the tanking question first?
Sure. The information that I have says that there was at least 3 tankings that were prior to or part of the test plan. So they had an original set of test plans prior to the first launch, and there were 3 tankings as part of that. That was followed by the start of the static fire program, and then there was an additional tanking, at least 1 after that, in preparation for the launch. So I believe that those 4 to 5 tankings were all prior to the actual launch itself.
Okay. And then, Andrea, for the description of the launch windows, so we've got a number of constraints in play, and the first set of constraints simply have to do with the rocket's ability to meet its ascent performance criteria all the way through the translunar injection maneuver. And unique to the first couple of flights, we are performance constrained. We do have to loft the upper stage, and that lofting has to be done in such a way that with the Earth rotating on its axis and the Moon going about the Earth in its 28, 29-day lunar cycle, we have to meet the performance criteria in order to achieve basically the intercept point that's determined by the translunar injection maneuver with the upper stage and the Space Launch System rocket. So that is part of the driver, but the other drivers in the launch window have to do with screening out what are essentially eclipse periods of greater than 90 minutes of where the spacecraft would fly through a period of time where it does not have sunlight. And our spacecraft loves sunlight because it is the power source through the solar array wings, but then also it keeps it warm enough from a thermal standpoint that we can fly into the deep space environment where you don't really have much radiant heating or when you're near the Moon, lunar albedo that warms the spacecraft up. So the 90-minute eclipse constraints, sometimes there are just the right alignment of the sun with the Earth between it and the Moon as the spacecraft either heads outbound or on the return leg, that you could see an extended period of an eclipse. So we don't fly on those days as well. And then the last set of constraints have to do with reentry of the spacecraft and specifically the range from entry interface to splashdown. We have to hit specific range to target criteria, and if the return trajectory is not such that we can hit that, we won't fly on those days. And then also we want to land and splashdown and daylight to assist the recovery. So when you look at the ascent performance through translunar injection, when you look at the eclipse constraints, when you look at the range to entry interface constraints, and then when you look at lighting at splashdown, is you have this three-body problem. Again, the Earth rotating on its axis, the moon going about the Earth, and then the spacecraft heading outbound and returning. We're trying to meet all those constraints, and that determines when we can launch to this specific orbit called the distant retrograde orbit about the moon. I hope I've answered your question.
Thanks, Mike. Next up, we have Isam Ahmed with AFP.
Yeah, thanks for taking my question. I was just wondering, perhaps for Charlie, or I'm not sure, how would you grade the outcome of the various tests if you were to grade it in a sort of academic scale? Were you at a B now, or were you at a C? Is it an F? And what do you need to where do we need to get to? Does it have to be like an A before you then go ahead and move forward, I assume? Thanks.
Yeah, so that's a tough one because it's hard to put a letter grade on the work that we've accomplished. And the reason I say that is it all depends on how you look at that. If you look at primary objectives, or if you look at the total number of objectives that are part of wet dress rehearsal, we've actually completed the majority of them. When you look at, all of the different pieces that make up wet dress, there's been a substantial amount done. In fact, I would say the majority of the objectives are complete. But there are some that we think are really important that we haven't done yet, or that we haven't completed all the way. And so it's really hard to set a letter grade to that, because it's all in, how you look at it. I would say overall in the wet dress rehearsal objectives, we've completed the majority of them, less the tanking to replenish and our terminal count. And so we definitely want to get those two pieces. We think they're really important, and that's why we'll come back and we'll finish those up.
Yeah, I always give Charlie an A myself, but it's kind of funny. It's like learning how to ride a bike. When you're first trying to learn how to ride a bike, you kind of try a couple of things, it doesn't quite. But once you get the hang of it, once we dial this in and know what the right sequence and approach to doing it is, we'll be in really good shape. So I feel that it's just the normal process that your team is. And the grade you get for going through the process is an A. How about that, Charlie?
All right, fair enough.
Thank you. Next up, we have Philip Sloff with NASA Spaceflight.
Thanks. I guess I have a question about the gaseous nitrogen equipment. If there was a time when the wet dress rehearsal was planned for, late last year, or even early this year, wouldn't this support equipment have been needed to be tied in much earlier than early April? Thanks.
The current equipment had sufficient capacity to be able to support the test as we understood it. However, we didn't see the robustness we wanted to see with the current equipment. The planned upgrade's been in place for a while. In fact, it was delayed a couple times. Like, what do they call it, Charlie? It's when they're tying it in or turning it over, because we've had a lot of launch here at the Cape, and so they're looking for the right time to tie it in and make the final connections. And so we thought we had sufficient capacity to be able to do the wet dress type activity. We're seeing now that we really want that robustness. And so we're going to wait a little bit to get the robustness, go back into the VAB, do some other works. But we're feeling that what we've seen so far is the robustness for the system is really important. And that's kind of part of the learning curve, too. Just so you know, the system itself has operated for decades, and usually it's very reliable. I remember throughout the shuttle program, we didn't really run into too many problems with some of the systems of this nature. And so it was a little bit of a surprise to see that we needed to bring in this system to get the robustness we wanted, but it's certainly the right decision at this point. And that's why we went ahead and working with Charlie made the decision to roll back so we can get that done. And also, I think we really want to get the check valve and a couple other things fixed as well.
Thank you. Next up, we have Michael Greshko with National Geographic.
Hi, thanks so much for doing this. I have two quick questions. Number one, I think this might be for Charlie, but is any of the work or sort of the options for the initial phase of work in the VAB going to cut down on additional work that would be done in the VAB after another attempt at the wet dress rehearsal? And then a second question for Mike. I think in a previous call you had said that there were cutouts in the launch window for July 2nd through 4th. So if you could just confirm whether those cutouts exist and then sort of the rationale behind that cutout. Thanks.
Well, let's see. How about I take the pre-launch piece first, and then we'll let Mike take the launch window cutout. So with regard to the options and how does it affect the work and the VAB workflow, that's when we wanted to develop a couple of different options. The first is, as I described, it really looks at what are those things that we need for the next wet dress rehearsal, kind of that and Charlie calls it, a quick turn, right? It's a VAB quick turn, which is you get those things that you need to do a next wet dress, and then you roll out and you accomplish that. But that's not the only option on the table. There's certainly another one that looks at, it's not just those things you need for wet dress, but it's looking at what are the other items that you need to go accomplish before you go fly. And there's probably even another option in there that's a hybrid of those two, which says, hey, here's the full set of work, and we'll go, as we work our way through this, we'll be looking at what that work looks like in the VAB. We'll be looking at how this capability is being, accomplished out at the GN2 plant, how their schedules are coming along, and we'll be looking at those two kind of in parallel swim lanes, and we'll be making, decisions. I mean, certainly we wouldn't just do the minimum amount. If we had additional time in the VAB, we would take advantage of that additional window in the VAB while we were waiting on the additional capability to come online at the plant. We'd be doing other work that gets us closer to launch. That's really part of the benefit of coming back to the VAB, is that, you're fairly limited at the pad, given that it's a clean pad with the amount of work that you can get done. And so by coming back to the VAB, it really allows us some flexibility in terms of our work schedules going forward. And we'll continue to look at that. And even as we decide on these options moving forward, if we see that something else changes, we'll take that into the mix, and we'll adjust our work schedules and our plans accordingly, because ultimately, our goal is to get back in a configuration where we can go test, and we can get that test behind us, that wet dress test behind us, and we can get ready for launch.
Okay. And Michael, this is Mike Serafin. On your question about the July window cutouts, yes, the July 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, we do have a cutout in our launch availability there, and it is for one of the reasons that I previously cited, which is an eclipse violation, which is greater than 90 minutes. So in other words, the rocket is able to provide the performance to deliver the spacecraft to the point of translunar injection and intercept the moon on the way out. So it's not on the Space Launch System side. It is literally just the alignment of the sun, the Earth, and the moon as the spacecraft heads outbound. It is on the outbound leg that we have a greater than 90-minute eclipse violation, so that's why we're not flying on those days. If those days are when we are presented with an opportunity.
Thank you. Next up, we have Stephen Clark with Spaceflight Now.
Thank you for taking my question. I have a couple of questions, if I could. First of all, there was a mention in a tweet last week, I think before the hydrogen leak was reported, about a pressure surge in the hydrogen system. Was that related to the leak, or was that a separate issue? And if so, what was that? Also, wanted to talk to you about the flight termination system limit, the 20-day limit from, I think, rollout until the launch has to occur, or else that has to be serviced. Can you go into some detail about what that limit exactly is? What component, what system has to be changed out or addressed after 20 days, and is there any flexibility in that? Just some details on that schedule constraint you may be facing down the road. Thanks.
Let's see. I'll take the first question about the hydrogen leak, and I think the question was about a surge that we saw. I just want to make sure that I'm. Oh, okay. So what we saw during the loading operations is, as you may when we were in, and this may have been part of the tweet, right, is when we were doing our slow fill operations across the hydrogen plate, we had nominal performance. Of course, that's at a much lower pressure. And so when we transition from what we call slow fill to fast fill, which is we increase the flow into the vehicle, kind of like the name implies, there's a pressure increase that comes with that. And what we saw during that time is that we saw the leak rate in this canister go up, went up pretty quickly right after that transition to fast fill, and then when we went to slow fill, we saw it come back down just as quickly. So again, and I know I talked about this last time, but if you think about you've got a flight side plate on the vehicle and you've got a ground side plate, and they're mated up together, and where we detected this leak was on the back side or on the ground side of that ground side plate. So there's a canister there that covers where the 8-inch and the 4-inch lines come into the plate. And it's a pretty small area when you, in the big scheme of things, it's a pretty small area. So when you get a leak in there and it's also enclosed, you'll see those spikes come up pretty quick. And that is what we saw. The good news in all that, though, is in that plate cavity between the flight plate and the ground plate, we did not see any significant increase there at all. So that's the good news in that scenario. And I would also add that this is pretty typical of these high pressure, very cold cryogenic systems, and hydrogen being just molecularly really small. So, this is, I would say, a typical kind of problem that you can have when in these hydrogen systems. Really cold temperatures, increase in pressure, and again, the area that we saw the leak in was on the ground side of the ground plate on the back, if you will. So. Hope that helps a little bit.
Thank you. Next up, we have Chris Gephardt with NASA Spaceflight.
Hi, thank you so much. I think these are, or at least the first one is for Charlie. Can you walk me through when that helium check valve in the ICPS first malfunctioned? Was this something that worked on the previous, on wet dress rehearsal attempts 1 and 2, and then failed on getting ready for 3? And also, as you're sort of looking toward the launch windows now, can you remind us, too, is there a daytime launch requirement for Artemis 1, or would you launch at night if it came to that?
All right, so let me take the question about the helium bottles, and let me get you the exact date here. I'm trying to look through my notes. Okay, I think I may have found it. Yeah, so it was after Run 2, so we had nominal performance as part of WDR Run 2, and it was as we were preparing for Run 3, we had an issue with one of the E-regs, that's one of the regulators down in the ML base. And so we had gone through and done some securing operations in preparation for changing that out. And so it was after we had made that change, tested that hardware then supplies some pressure to that upper stage panel, and that feeds the flight side helium bottles. And so it was during that repressurization that we detected the problem. And so that we did have nominal performance during runs 1 and 2, but that was something that happened as we were getting ready for Run 3.
Yeah, I guess the second part was, is lighted conditions for launch a requirement? The answer is no. It's a desirable thing, but it's not a requirement. And depending on where we are and what part of the year that we launch, we have more opportunities for lighted conditions. We have a lot of cameras on the vehicle, and we have a lot of lights at the pad, and we've looked at this extensively. So it's not a constraint.
Thank you. We have time for one final question. Eric Berger, your line is now open.
Hi, thanks again. I have a question about the 3 options I think that Charlie mentioned. The first one I understand, the third one I understand, but the middle one I didn't quite understand, where you talked about doing more work in the VAB, but maybe not arming the flight safety system. So could you maybe just talk a little bit about that? Thank you.
Yes, so when we rolled out for wet dress, we had accomplished all of the work that was required for wet dress rehearsal, but there was a little bit of remaining work that we knew that we were going to have to perform once we got back to the VAB, in addition to the flight safety system verifications that were required. And so when I talk about that middle option, it really is finishing out all of the work required for flight, any NCs that we picked up while we've been at the pad, NCs, any nonconformances that we've picked up out at the pad, any nonconformances that were listed against the VAB work schedule that we didn't require for wet dress, but we knew that we needed to complete for flight. It's the closeout activities. It really is the complete set of work that you would need to do before you fly, less the flight safety system testing.
Thank you all for joining us today. You can listen to a replay of this teleconference online by visiting the Media Resources tab at www.nasa.gov/Artemis-1 later this afternoon. We will also plan on hosting another media teleconference in a couple of weeks. To follow along with updates for Artemis 1, please go to the Artemis blog at www.blogs.nasa.gov/Artemis and join us on the NASA Exploration Ground Systems Twitter account. Thanks again, and that will conclude our call.